Hi, good morning. My name is Evelyn Ward, and the day my son told me I was too old and weak to understand real military pressure, his commanding general crossed a crowded reception hall, stopped in front of me, saluted, and called me Colonel. Connor had just introduced me as a woman who spent 30 years behind a desk. He had laughed while saying it, not loudly enough to sound cruel, but loudly enough for the officers around him to hear. He said I should sit near the back during his promotion ceremony so I would not feel overwhelmed by all the protocol. He told me not to wear my medals because the day was about his career, not mine. Then he added that military service had changed since my time, and that people like me could not understand the pressure officers face. Smiled politely. I did not answer. Then General Marcus Hale entered the room. He was a 4-star general, the commanding officer of the installation, and a man Connor had admired for most of his adult life. Marcus saw me from across the room and stopped walking. The conversation around him slowed. He moved directly toward me, straightened, raised his hand, and held the salute with a kind of precision that made every officer nearby stand differently. "Colonel Ward," he said. I was beginning to think I would never have the chance to thank you in person. Connor's face changed before anyone explained why. The truth became worse for him a few moments later. Connor had spent years studying a classified officer whose decisions saved dozens of soldiers during an operation that shaped modern evacuation doctrine. He had written part of his military thesis about that officer. He had described the strategist as brilliant, disciplined, and fearless under pressure. In the public documents, the officer appeared only as Senior Intelligence Officer EW. My son had never realized that EW stood for Evelyn Ward. Before I tell you why my own son spent years mocking the military career he secretly admired, I want to ask you for one small favor. Leave a comment telling me the city and country you are listening. I know it is a simple question, and you have probably heard it before, but those comments genuinely help these stories reach more people. They also remind me that someone is listening from a place I may never have the chance to visit. Every comment helps me keep creating stories here for you, and I appreciate it more than you may realize. Now let me go back to the beginning, because my son did not wake up one morning and decide I was insignificant. Someone taught him that version of me, and for a long time I helped the lie survive by remaining silent. I was 22 when I joined the United States Army. This was long before people spoke casually about women leading operational teams or working inside intelligence units. Women served, sacrificed, and carried responsibility, but much of that work happened behind titles that made danger sound administrative. I learned early that the words on a personnel form rarely explained what a person actually did. My official assignments included planning, analysis, logistics coordination, and intelligence support. To outsiders, that sounded like paperwork. Sometimes it was paperwork. Sometimes the information on one sheet of paper decided whether 40 people returned alive. I met Stephen Ward during my 3rd year of service. He was not military. He worked in transportation management for a private contractor near Fort Bragg. Stephen was handsome, funny, and comfortable in places where I still felt like I had to prove I belonged. He liked telling people he understood the military because he worked around soldiers. At first I found that charming. He listened when I explained my work, or at least I believed he did. He said he admired my discipline. He told me he had never met a woman who seemed so certain about the direction of her life. We married after 18 months. Connor was born 3 years later. I loved being his with a force that frightened me. Until I had believed discipline could prepare a person for almost anything. Motherhood proved there were forms of fear no training could contain. I worried when he slept too quietly. I memorized every sound he made. I carried photographs of him inside files I was not allowed to discuss. When Connor was 4, I accepted an assignment that required long periods away from home. Stephen said he supported me. He repeated that word often, support. What he meant was that he supported my career as long as it did not become more important than his own needs. My responsibilities increased. I was promoted. I began working with joint teams that coordinated intelligence across military branches and allied units. Some assignments were brief, others removed me from home for months. I missed events. There is no honest way to tell this story without admitting that. I missed Connor's first school play. I missed one birthday completely because communications were restricted. I returned late for another and found the cake already cut. I missed a baseball championship when my flight was delayed after an operation. Each absence created a wound. Stephen made sure those wounds pointed towards me. At first, the comments were subtle. When I called from overseas, Connor would ask why I cared more about meetings than him. A 6-year-old does not invent that language alone. When I returned home, Stephen would say Connor had stopped expecting me to appear because disappointment was unhealthy. He said this in front of him. I objected. Stephen accused me of avoiding responses. He said he was the parent who stayed. That part was true. He was physically present more often, but he also controlled the meaning of every absence. He never told Connor that I had volunteered to postpone order to proceed. He never told him. I called them before events to ask for recording. He never gave him all the letters at the time. I know that. I believed Connor received and chose not to answer. My career moved into areas I could not explain at home. I signed non-disclosure agreements. Some missions remained classified. My family knew only that I worked in intelligence. Stephen began telling relatives I had an office job. He said I sat in secure buildings reading reports while he managed everything difficult at home. There were enough facts inside the lie to make it believable. I did sit in secure buildings. I did read reports. What he omitted was that those reports arrived from people in danger and often required decisions before sunrise. He omitted the nights I helped reroute aircraft. He omitted the evacuation plans. He omitted the times I left the command center because the situation on the ground required someone who understood both the intelligence and the people depending on it. One operation changed everything. For years, it was known publicly only by an abbreviated name and a partial timeline. I will call it Operation Glass Harbor, though that was not the real designation. A joint team had been sent into a region where intelligence suggested a hostile network was moving weapons through mountain routes. The mission was supposed to be limited. It was not. The team was cut off after weather-grounded air support, and local forces changed positions without warning. Communications became unstable. The primary extraction route was compromised. The standard map showed 2 options. Both were exposed. I was serving as the senior intelligence officer inside the coordination cell. Among the trapped personnel was a young lieutenant named Marcus Hale. At that time, he was not famous. He was 26 years old, responsible for people older than he was, and trying not to let fear enter his voice over the radio. The command staff considered delaying extraction until daylight. I believe daylight would turn a difficult situation into a massacre. Satellite imagery showed an old service corridor running behind the ridge. It was not marked as passable. Previous assessments described it as blocked. I found older terrain records suggesting part of the route remained open. The information was incomplete. Using it meant risking equipment and personnel on a path no one could verify. Not using it meant leaving the team exposed. I recommended immediate movement. The recommendation was rejected. I presented it again. A senior officer told me the route existed only on outdated surveys. I said the enemy was planning around our current maps, not our forgotten ones. That sentence later appeared in training materials. At the time, it irritated everyone in the room. I requested permission to join the forward coordination element. I was told my role was inside the command center. I replied that the command center no longer had accurate enough information to command from a distance. Eventually, permission was granted. The route was worse than expected. A vehicle became stuck. We moved part of the team on foot. There were injuries. There were moments when I believed my recommendation had killed all of us. Then the weather shifted just enough for a short extraction window. The corridor brought the team to a position aircraft could reach. 43 people were evacuated. 3 were critically wounded. Marcus was one of them. He had lost blood and consciousness by the time we reached the aircraft. I did not expect him to remember me. I barely remembered individual faces afterward. For years, the operation remained classified. A public summary credited joining an adaptive leadership. Mine did not. That was normal. I received a recommendation for a high-level decoration. It stalled. Then it disappeared. I was told the mission details could not support a public award citation. I accepted that explanation. Later, I learned there was another reason. Stephen had contacted an attorney during the early stages of our divorce. He was preparing to seek primary custody of Connor. A military recognition that showed operational responsibility and professional credibility complicated the story he planned to tell. Stevens submitted statements claiming I was emotionally unstable after deployment. He suggested I exaggerated my role in classified work to justify abandoning my family. He did not have access to the full mission details. He knew enough to damage the recommendation. He also used my inability to discuss classified events against me. When asked why I traveled, I could not explain. When asked what made my work essential, I could not provide documents. Stephen turned secrecy into evidence of insignificance. Our marriage ended when Connor was 11. The custody battle lasted nearly a year. Connor remained mostly with Stephen because his school and daily routine were already based near Stephen's home. I was granted visitation and extended periods during leave. On paper, the arrangement looked reasonable. In practice, Stephen controlled access. Visits were cancelled because Connor had activity. Calls went unanswered. Letters disappeared. Stephen told me Connor did not want to see me. He told Connor I chose not to come. I should have fought harder. That sentence followed me for years. At the time, I believed pushing through attorneys would make Connor feel caught between us. I thought patience would protect him. Patience protected the lie. Connor grew older and colder. At 13, he stopped calling me Mom during visit. At 15, he told me Stephen had explained everything. I asked what everything meant. He said I had left because the army made me feel important. He said my job was not even dangerous. He said his father had raised him while I hid behind a uniform. I tried to correct him. Then I reached the wall created by classified work. I could not say where I had been. I could not describe the operations. I could not name the people. I could say only that my service involved more than he understood. To a teenager already convinced I was selfish, that sounded like arrogance. Stephen knew it would. Connor joined the army after college. When he told me, I felt pride and fear at the same time. Part of me hoped military service would help him understand the difference between choosing absence and being required to leave. Instead, it gave him new language for judging me. Connor performed well. He was disciplined, ambitious, and intelligent. He advanced quickly. He believed he had inherited resilience from his father. Stephen encouraged that belief. At Connor's commissioning ceremony, I sat 3 rows behind Stephen. Connor thanked his father publicly for teaching him sacrifice. He did not mention me. I told myself the day belonged to him. That became a habit. Every time he excluded me, I called it restraint. Every time he repeated Stephen's version, I called it pain. Every time he mocked my service, I told myself he lacked information. But a lack of information does not force cruelty. Connor made choices too. Years later, he began graduate military studies while serving as a captain. His thesis focused partly on emergency extraction doctrine and command decisions under incomplete intelligence. One chapter analyzed Operation Glass Harbor. The declassified documents still removed my full name. They identified me as Senior Intelligence Officer E.W. Connor. Admired that office. He discussed the thesis with me once during a holiday dinner. Said E.W. understood operational pressure better than most senior commanders. I asked what impressed him. Connor said the officer challenged outdated assumptions, took responsibility, and moved forward when others hesitated. I almost told him. The words reached my throat. Then Stephen interrupted and said, "Your mother would have hated someone who left the desk." Connor laughed. I remained silent. That silence is difficult to defend. Part of me wanted Connor to respect me without requiring proof. Another part feared that revealing the truth would sound like an attempt to steal his academic accomplishment. I had become too accustomed to disappear. Connor eventually learned I had retired as a colonel, treated the rank like an administrative reward. He said senior officers in support roles often advance through time and politics. I asked whether he believed I had earned nothing. He answered, "I believe you had a different kind of career. Different meant lesser." By the time of his promotion to major, Connor was 36. He was assigned to Fort Liberty in North Carolina. His wife, Rachel, contacted me privately and encouraged me to attend the ceremony. Connor had sent a formal invitation, but no personal message. Rachel said the promotion mattered deeply to him. I booked a hotel and prepared my uniform. My dress uniform had not been worn since retirement. The medals and ribbons remained arranged exactly as regulations required. When I opened the garment bag, I remembered the person I had been before silence became my main skill. 2 days before the ceremony, Connor called. He sounded tense. He said he was glad I planned to attend. Then he asked whether I intended to wear my uniform. I said yes. There was a pause. Connor told me most guests would wear civilian clothing. I knew that false. Retired officers commonly wore uniforms to formal military ceremonies. I asked whether he wanted me not to wear. He said he did not want the event to become confusing. Confusing for whom? He said people might assume I had some connection to the command or try to ask about myself. I told him I could answer politely. Connor sighed. Then he said, "Mum, This day is about the work I actually do now. I don't need you trying to make your old career relevant." The words were direct enough that even I could not soften them. I said I would wear civilian clothes. Connor thanked me as though I had finally behaved responsibly. That evening Rachel called. She apologized. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. She said Connor had been under pressure from Stephen, who planned to attend and give a toast. Then she mentioned something that changed the tone of the week. Connor had recently found an old box of my medals and documents in Stephen's storage room. I asked what box. Rachel said Connor had taken it to their house but hidden it because he was afraid I would bring the contents to the ceremony. My medals had never been stored with Stephen. At least, I did not think they had. I realized the box might contain items missing since the divorce. Copies of recommendations, documents. I asked her whether she had opened it. She said no. Connor had locked it in his study. I arrived at Fort Liberty the following afternoon. I wore a navy suit at the pre-ceremony reception. Stephen greeted me near the entrance. He looked pleased. Age had softened his appearance without changing the satisfaction he took in controlling a room. He glanced at my clothes and said, "Oh, good choice." I asked what he meant. He said Connor deserved one day without competing uniform. I told him I had never competed with my son. Stephen smiled. "No, you just always needed everyone to know you ranked the room." Before I could answer, Connor approached. He was in dress uniform. For 1 second, pride moved through me despite everything. He looked like the boy who once marched through the house wearing a cardboard helmet. Then his expression tightened. He introduced me to 2 officers. "This is my mother, Evelyn." One of them asked whether I had served. Connor answered before I could. She worked mostly behind a desk. Intelligence administration. Nothing like what we do. The officer looked uncomfortable. I said, "Congratulations on your assignment." The conversation moved on. More people arrived. Connor repeated versions of the introduction. He was not merely simplifying. He was controlling the story before I spoke. At one point, a lieutenant colonel asked how long I had served. I said 30 years. Connor laughed and added, "She survived the great paper shortage of 1998. A few people smiled. Stephen laughed loudly. I looked at my son. He did not appear ashamed. That hurt more than the joke. Later, Connor pulled me aside. He said seating had changed and asked me to sit farther back during the ceremony. I asked why. He said senior command families needed the front section. I knew spouses and parents usually sat near the officer being promoted. Connor then said Rachel would remain in front because she participated in the pinning. Stephen would sit beside her. There was one remaining chair. Connor wanted it available for a senior mentor. I asked whether he meant I was no longer part of the ceremony. He said, "Please don't make this emotional." I told him I was asking a factual question. Connor rubbed his forehead. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "You're 64, Mom. You've been retired for years. You wouldn't understand what real operational pressure looks like anymore. This is not one of your old office ceremonies." I felt something inside me become very still. I said, "I understand." Connor looked relieved. Then General Marcus Hale entered the reception hall. I had not seen Marcus in more than 20 years. He had been a young lieutenant when I last saw him, unconscious on a stretcher, his uniform dark with blood. Now he carried 4 stars. His photograph had appeared in military publications, news interviews, and official briefings. Connor had quoted him in his thesis. Marcus greeted several officers near the entrance. Then he saw me. His body stopped before his face. He handed a folder to an aide and walked directly across the room. People moved aside. Marcus stopped in front of me, came to attention, and saluted. I returned the salute automatically. Colonel Ward, I was beginning I would never have a chance to thank you in person. The room quieted. Connor stood several feet away. I said, General Hale, it has been a long time. Marcus lowered his hand. You carried half my unit out of a corridor everyone else had written off. I corrected him. I found the route. Many people carried the unit. Marcus smiled. You still refuse the part of the story that belongs to you. Connor stepped close. He asked whether Marcus knew me from an intelligence conference. Marcus looked at him. Major Ward, your mother commanded the operational cell that brought us out of Glass Harbor. Connor stared. Marcus continued. She was EW. No one spoke. I watched understanding arrive in my son's face. First confusion, then rejection, then recognition. Connor had read the reports. He knew the initials. He had written pages praising decisions he believed belonged to an anonymous officer. Marcus asked whether Connor had ever shown me the thesis. Connor said no. I told Marcus that Connor had discussed. Marcus looked almost amused. Then he already knows your work. Stephen approached from behind him. He said there must be some misunderstanding because my role had been intelligence support. Marcus turned. Intelligence support is why I am alive. Stephen opened his mouth. Marcus continued before he could speak. Colonel Ward identified the route, challenged the extraction delay, moved forward with the coordination element, and remained until the last critical casualties loaded. The officers around us looked at me different. I did not enjoy it. That surprised me. For years, I imagined recognition would feel like justice. Instead, it felt like witnessing how quickly respect changes when authority confirms something a person refused to see on their own. Connor asked why my name was not in the public documents. Marcus said the operation remained partially classified for years and that several citations were restricted. Then he mentioned the decoration recommendation. He said he had recently learned it was blocked during administrative review. I saw Stephen's face change. Marcus noticed too. He told me the Army had reopened the case after additional records were declassified. A formal review was underway. Connor looked from Marcus to me. He whispered, Why didn't you tell me? I answered honestly. You never asked to know me. You asked only enough questions to confirm what you already believed. The promotion ceremony continued. Connor stood on the stage. Rachel and Stephen pinned his new rank. I remained in the second row because Marcus's aide moved me there after learning about the seating change. Connor's eyes found me several times. He looked unsettled. When the ceremony ended, Marcus asked me to join a private meeting. Connor, Rachel, and Stephen were also invited. Inside the conference room, Marcus placed a document box on the table. The records had been released only earlier. They included operational summary, witness statements, award recommendations, and administrative correspondence. Marcus explained that the original decoration package had been delayed because of classification concerns. Then a separate complaint questioned my credibility. The complaint came from Stephen. Connor turned toward his father. Stephen said he had been advised to provide honest information during the custody case. Marcus read part of the statement. Stephen had described me as unstable, prone to exaggeration, and obsessed with presenting ordinary support work as combat leadership. He had submitted the statement not only to a family court attorney, but to an official reviewing my award recommendation. I had never known. Stephen said he was protecting Connor. I asked how damaging my service record protected a child. He said the recognition would have strengthened my custody claim. There it was. Not concern. Strategy. Connor looked sick. Marcus removed another folder. Inside were copies of letters. My letters, dozens of them, some still sealed. I recognized my handwriting immediately. They were addressed to Connor at different ages. Stephen had stored them with legal documents after the divorce. I reached for the first envelope. It was dated near Connor's 12th birthday. The letter contained a drawing of a terrible birthday cake I had made in the corner because I knew he liked when I tried to draw. Connor stared at it. He asked Stephen why the letters were there. Stephen said some arrived at difficult times. He claimed Connor was angry and did not want them. Connor said he had never seen them. Stephen responded that he had been too young to understand. There were more than 40 letters. Some had been sent from military postal addresses. Others were written during training periods or temporary assignments. One described Connor's first baseball glove. Another apologized for missing a school ceremony and included questions about every class he was taking. I had written about thunderstorms because he feared them. I had written about the treehouse we planned to build. I had written that I loved him so often the phrase became painful to read. Connor opened letters with shaking hands. He found one written after he stopped answering my call. I had said I would keep calling even if he remained silent because a parent's responsibility did not end when love became difficult. Stephen stood near the wall. For the first time in my life, he looked like a man who had lost control of the room. Connor asked whether Stephen had hidden all of them. Stephen said he had protected Connor from promises I might not keep. I told him he had protected his own version of me. Connor turned toward me. He said, "You could have told me." I looked at the letter. "I told you 43 times. That sentence ended the meeting. Connor did not attend the reception dinner. Rachel found him sitting alone in their car. Stephen left the base early. The family began dividing almost immediately. Stephen called relatives and claimed military officials had ambushed him. He said I used Marcus to humiliate Connor on the day of his promotion. My sister said I should have warned everyone. And Uncle argued that Stephen's choices were wrong, but understandable because raising a child alone had been difficult. No one seemed to remember that I had also been Connor's parent. Difficulty did not belong only to the person who controlled the household. Connor called me 2 days later. He asked to meet. We sat in a quiet coffee shop outside the base. He brought the box of letters. He had read all of them. Connor looked exhausted. He said he did not know where to begin. I told him not to begin with Stephen. He looked confused. I said blaming his father for everything would be easier than examining his own choices. Stephen taught him a story. Connor chose to repeat it as an adult. He chose to mock me in front of officers. He chose to hide my medals. He chose to move my seat. He chose to call me weak. Connor lowered his eyes. Then he admitted something Rachel had already suggested. He found the medal box 3 months before the ceremony. Inside were ribbons and citations that did not match an ordinary desk career. Instead of asking me, he searched online. He found partial references to my assignment, but assumed I had exaggerated. He hid the box because he feared I would wear medals that made people ask questions. I asked why questions frightened him. Connor said, because if you mattered that much, then everything Dad told me was wrong. That was the most honest thing he had said. He had protected the lie because the truth threatened his identity. Connor believed he became strong despite an absent mother. If I had been serving in dangerous, important roles while still trying to reach him, His resentment became more complicated. He did not want complexity. He wanted... I told him pain could explain cruelty without... Connor began crying. I had seen my son cry as a child. As an adult, he tried to hide it. I did not reach across the table. That surprised him. He asked whether I could forgive him. I said I did not know yet. He nodded. For once, he did not ask me to make his discomfort easier. If you are enjoying this story and would like to support the work that goes into creating these videos, you can buy me a coffee through the link in the description. Any contribution, no matter the amount, helps me dedicate more time to writing and sharing new stories here with you. The military review continued. Marcus contacted former members of the operation. Several provided statements. One had carried the memory of Glass Harbor for decades. Another said my decision prevented the team from being surrounded. A medic described how I refused evacuation until the final wounded soldier was loaded. Those records did not transform me into someone new. They made visible what had already happened. The Army scheduled a formal recognition ceremony. I considered declining. For years, I told myself awards did not matter. That was partly wisdom and partly defense. It is easier to claim recognition does not matter when it has been denied. Marcus asked me to accept not only for myself, but for the women whose work disappeared into classifications and administrative language. I agreed. Connor learned about the ceremony through Rachel. He asked whether he could attend. I said yes. Then Stephen announced he planned to speak publicly. He contacted a local journalist and presented himself as the former husband who sacrificed his own ambitions to raise the child of a military hero. He claimed he had supported my service while protecting Connor from its emotional cost. The article described him as the forgotten parent behind my success. Stephen had found a new way to center himself. I could have argued publicly. Instead, my attorney requested the release of documents connected to the custody proceedings and award review. The records showed Stephen's statements. They showed cancelled visits. They showed letters sent to his address. They showed messages in which he told my attorney that Connor was unavailable while school records placed him at home. They showed Stephen had repeatedly refused alternative visitation dates. Then Marcus's office released the declassified portions of the operation record. The contrast between Stephen's public claim and documented behavior became impossible to ignore. The journalist published a correction. Relatives who had defended him became quiet. Stephen called Connor and accused him of choosing me. Connor answered, "This is not about choosing her. It is about finally seeing what you did." That conversation marked a change in him. Not because he defended me, because he stopped allowing family loyalty to replace truth. The recognition ceremony took place 6 months after Connor's promotion. I wore my uniform. This time, no one asked me to hide it. The auditorium was filled with service members, veterans, families, and officials. Marcus delivered the opening remark. He described Glass Harbor in the limited detail now permitted. Then he spoke about invisible leadership. He said history often remembers the person standing in front of the camera and forgets the person who recognized the only open road. When my name was called, I walked onto the stage. Connor sat beside Rachel in the front row. Stephen did not attend. The decoration was pinned to my uniform. People applauded. I looked at Connor. He was standing. His eyes were wet. After the presentation, Marcus invited me to speak. I had prepared remarks about the operation. Instead, I spoke about silence. I said silence can be honorable when it protects lives. It can also become dangerous when other people fill it with lies. I spoke about women whose classified work looks small on public paper. I spoke about parents whose children measured love only by physical presence without knowing what was hidden behind absence. I admitted that service did not erase the pain my career caused. I also said pain did not give anyone the right to invent a lesser version of another person. Then I said, some families believe sacrifice becomes real only after a medal proves it happened. By then, the person who sacrificed may have spent decades being treated as though nothing was given. No one needed Connor's name. He knew. I ended by saying recognition arrived late, but truth arriving late was still better than a lie surviving forever. After the ceremony, Connor approached me carrying the box of letters. He asked whether we could go through them together. I said not that day. He accepted the answer. That mattered. Rebuilding did not happen through one apology. Connor began calling weekly. At first the conversations were awkward. He asked about assignments. Some details remained classified. I told him what I could. He learned that I had remembered his birthday. He learned I once carried a cassette recording of his voice through 3 countries because hearing him laugh helped me sleep. He learned I had requested reassignment twice and been denied. He also learned that I had made mistakes. There were moments when I chose career opportunities I could have declined. There were times pride kept me from admitting how badly the distance hurt. There were legal battles I should have fought harder. Truth did not make me perfect. It made me whole. Connor apologized more than once. The first apology focused on what Stephen taught him. The second focused on what Connor himself had done. That was the apology. He said he had used my age as a weapon because it made him feel modern and strong. He admitted he treated retirement like disappearance. He said seeing Marcus salute me forced him to confront how easily he respected authority when it came from a man, but dismissed it when it came from his mother. That recognition was painful. It was also necessary. Rachel helped without controlling the process. She never demanded reconciliation. She created opportunities and allowed us to decide whether to use them. A year late, Connor invited me to speak to officers in his unit about intelligence failures and decision-making under uncertainty. I almost declined because I worried the invitation came from guilt. Then Connor said, I am asking because you are qualified, not because you are my mother. That was the first time he separated respect from obligation. I accepted. During the session, Connor introduced me by rank and full career history. He did not dramatize the relationship. He simply told the truth. Afterward, a young captain asked how Connor had grown up with someone like me and never known the story. Connor answered before I could, because I believed the person who spoke the loudest instead of asking the person who lived it. Stephen's life changed. He lost relationship. Some family members stopped speaking to him. Others continued to defend him, arguing that old wounds should remain buried. Stephen sent me a letter claiming he regretted how events unfolded. He did not say he regretted hiding the letter. He regretted exposure. I did not answer. Forgiveness does not require reopening every door. Years passed. The medal remained in a case in my study. It mattered to me, not because it proved I deserved respect, because it corrected an official record Stephen had tried to damage. But the most important object in the room was not the medal. It was the box of letters. Connor returned them to me after copying each one. He kept the copies. Sometimes he called and asked about a sentence written decades earlier. One letter mentioned a song he had forgotten. Another described a toy he remembered breaking. We reconstructed pieces of his childhood from words Stephen tried to erase. We could not recover the lost. People often say relationships can be repaired. Repair is not restoration. A repaired object carries evidence of the break. Connor and I became close in a new way, but never innocent again. That was acceptable. Innocence had allowed too many lies. Understanding was stronger. There was one letter Connor struggled to open. It had been written during the week of his 10th birthday. The envelope had a stain across one corner from rain that entered a temporary communication shelter. Inside, I had written about the red bicycle he wanted. I knew Stephen planned to buy it, but I had included money anyway and asked Connor to choose the helmet himself. The cash was gone. The letter had never been opened. Connor asked whether I remembered sending it. I remembered every detail. I remembered standing in line to mail it. I remembered calculating whether it would arrive on time. I remembered checking for a reply that never came. Connor put the letter down and said, "Dad gave me that bicycle and told me you forgot." That was one of the few moments when I saw anger replace guilt. He had spent decades believing a specific wound belonged to me. Now he understood it had been manufactured. I told him anger could become another prison if he let it define every memory. Connor asked how I had avoided hating Stephen. I said I had not avoided it. I had simply outlived the period when hatred organized my day. That answer disappointed him because he wanted a cleaner path. There was none. Healing did not make the past acceptable. It made the past less powerful. Connor eventually confronted Stephen in person. He did not tell me beforehand. They met in a restaurant halfway between their homes. Stephen arrived believing Connor wanted reconciliation. Connor brought copies of the hidden letters and the custody records. He asked one question. Was there ever a year when you did not know she was trying to reach me? Stephen reportedly spoke for nearly 20 minutes without answering. He discussed my deployments, the stress of parenting, the divorce, and the fear that I would take Connor away. Connor asked the question again. Stephen finally admitted he knew. Then he said he believed Connor was better without the confusion. Connor stood and left. For several months, he stopped speaking to his father. I did not encourage that. I also did not interfere. Their relationship belonged to them. Stephen later told relatives I had turned Connor against him. The irony would have been funny if it had not cost so much. I had spent years being accused of absence while Stephen's version of parenthood required controlling every road back to me. The Army Review uncovered another. My award package had not merely been delayed. A reviewing official had requested clarification after receiving Stephen's statement. A senior commander who knew the mission could have corrected the record. He chose not to, partly because public recognition risked reopening classified questions. Convenience joined malice. That mattered to me. For years, I imagined one person had erased. The truth was less satisfying. Systems erase people when enough individuals decide correction is inconvenient. I agreed to participate in a recorded oral history project about women in intelligence roles. The interviewer asked why I had remained silent for so long. I gave the expected answers about classification and family privacy. Then I said the deeper truth. Silence had become my identity. I was proud of enduring without explanation. I mistook self-erasure for strength. The interviewer asked what changed. I said, my son used my silence as permission to humiliate me. That was the moment endurance stopped feeling noble. The oral history reached more people than I expected. Women wrote to me. Some had served, others had been caregivers, nurses, teachers, business owners, or mothers whose work became invisible because no title impressed their family. One woman said her children treated 30 years of caregiving as though she had never worked. Another said her husband introduced her as retired, even though she still ran the company they built. Their stories reminded me that the military details were unusual, but the injury was common. People become accustomed to someone give. Then they rename sacrifice as obligation. Connor read some of those letters. He said he had believed disrespect required shouting. He never understood that reducing someone to a joke could be just as cruel. I told him understanding arrived late. He said, I know. He did not ask me to say late was good enough. That restraint became part of his apology. On my 67th birthday, Connor visited with Rachel and their daughter, Lily. Lily was sick. She found the medal case and asked whether I had been brave. I told her bravery was a word people used after danger ended. She asked whether her father knew I was brave. Connor was standing in the doorway. He said, not soon enough. Then he sat beside us and asked me to tell Lily about the road behind the mountain. I told the story carefully. I removed details a child did not need. I described people who were lost, maps that were wrong, and a path everyone believed was closed. Lily asked how I knew it was open. I said, I did not know. I looked more closely than the people who were certain. Connor smiled. That was the lesson he needed long before the military. Certainty can be inherited. Truth has to be examined. A few months later, Connor asked me to attend another ceremony. This one was smaller. He was presenting awards to younger officers in his unit. Before the event, he asked whether I wanted to wear my uniform. The question was careful. I said no. I wore a gray dress and sat beside Rachel. Connor introduced me during his remarks. He did not call me a hero. He did not tell the entire story. He said, my mother taught me that leadership begins when certainty ends. Then he continued with the program. That introduction meant more to me than a dramatic tribute would have. He was no longer using me to repair his... He had learned something. Stephen made one final attempt to regain control. He announced that he was writing a memoir about raising the son of a classified officer. A publisher contacted me for comment. I declined. Connor did not. He sent the publisher court records, copies of the hidden letters and the correction published after Stephen's earlier interview. The project disappeared. Stephen called me furious. It was the first time we had spoken directly in years. He accused me of taking his son. Spent the long, finally learned the why. Stephen said I would die alone with my medals. I looked toward the kitchen where Connor and Lily were making pancakes. Then I ended the call. I do not tell that detail because family reconciliation is always the reward. Sometimes the reward is knowing the person who wanted you isolated no longer understands your life. The last major test of our rebuilt relationship came when Connor was considered for another command position. A review board asked whether the public controversy surrounding our family might affect his judgment. Years earlier, Connor would have treated that question as another injury caused by me. This time, he called before responding. He said he wanted to disclose everything honestly, including the way he had treated me before the promotion ceremony. I asked whether he was telling me because he wanted permission. He said no. He wanted to know before the board heard it from him. Connor submitted a statement acknowledging that he had repeated false claims, hidden my medals, and attempted to exclude me from his ceremony. He did not blame Stephen in the first paragraph. He described his father's manipulation later as context rather than an excuse. The board asked why those decisions should not disqualify him. Connor answered that leadership was not proven by never being wrong. It was proven by whether a person defended the error after truth became available. He was selected. When he called with the news, I congratulate. Then he said something I had never expected. I learned more from the day I was ashamed of you than from the day I was promoted. I told him I hoped he had learned more from what came afterward. He said he had. Connor later changed part of the training within his unit. He introduced case discussions about incomplete information, inherited assumptions, and the danger of mistaking familiarity for knowledge. He never used our family story without asking me, but the principles were there. One exercise gave officers a personnel profile that made a senior woman appear inexperienced. Additional information was released in stages. The officers had to examine how quickly they formed conclusions and which details they ignored. Connor sent me the exercise after the first session. At the bottom he had written, "I built this around the mistake I made with you. That did not erase the past." It showed he was willing to turn shame into responsibility instead of performance. Marcus retired the following year. At his retirement dinner, he asked me to sit with his family. Connor attended too. Marcus told the story of Glass Harbor without exaggerating my role or minimizing anyone else. He described the moment the command staff rejected the service corridor. Then he said, "Colonel Ward was the only person in the room more afraid of being wrong than of being ignored. That is why she kept checking." After dinner, Connor asked whether I had truly been afraid. I told him I had been terrified. He said the reports made me sound certain. I laughed. Reports are written after survival. That answer changed something in him too. For years, he had imagined courage as confidence. He began to understand that courage often looked like uncertainty carried forward without denial. Lily grew older and developed a fascination with maps. She liked spreading them across my dining table and drawing routes in colored pencil. Once she asked why people believed the corridor was closed. I explained that the newest map said so. She asked why I looked at an older one. I told her new information was not always complete information. Connor listened from the doorway. Later, he said he wished someone had taught him that about family. I told him families are often the first place people learn not to question the map. He wrote that sentence down. The box of letters remained available whenever he wanted. We did not read them order. Some were too painful. Some were funny. One contained a recipe I had copied badly because Connor loved a certain soup. Another included a list of movies I promised we would watch when I returned. One had only 3 paragraphs. I had been called away before finishing. At the bottom, I had written, "I will finish this tomorrow." There was no second page. Connor stared at that unfinished sentence for a long time. He said it represented our relationship better than anything else. I told him unfinished did not mean impossible. We began watching the movies from that old list, and some were terrible. Lily complained about the picture quality. Rachel made popcorn. There was no grand reconciliation scene. There were evenings, phone calls, questions, boundaries respected after decades of boundaries ignored. That was how trust returned, not as a speech, as repetition. My name is Evelyn Ward, and my son spent years admiring a classified officer without realizing she was the mother he'd been taught to dismiss. The The salute was not the moment I discovered who I was. I had known that. It was the moment Connor discovered how little he had ever tried to know me. The medal did not return the missed birth. The documents did not restore the letters to the hands of the child who needed them. The ceremony did not erase the humiliation. But truth changed what happened next. Connor no longer calls me weak. More importantly, he no longer believes age, silence, or motherhood makes a person small. He learned that the officer he admired and the mother he resented were never two different women. They were me. Now that you know the whole story, tell me honestly was I right to accept the public recognition and allow Stephen's lies to be exposed, even though it forced Connor to face the truth during the most important period of his career? Or should I have protected my son from that humiliation and handled everything privately? And what do you think about Connor? Did his father's manipulation explain his behavior? Or had he become old enough to be fully responsible for the way he treated me? Leave your opinion in the comments. I read the different perspectives, especially when people disagree about the difference between understanding someone's pain and excusing the harm they caused. And if you would like to support the channel directly and help me continue creating new stories, you can buy me a coffee through the link in the description. Every comment, every contribution, and every person who listens until the end helps more than you may realize. Thank you for listening.